Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second InterFAB Expert Talk, today on the topic of economic surplus. So a very specified topic. It's the second one. Maybe some of you have watched the first one, which was on traffic forecasting. And today, as mentioned, we are working on economic surplus. So we have there now 1 hour on this specific topic for economics. I'm very happy that about 150 people have registered to this meeting. So there are a lot of people who are joining this expert talk from all over Europe. There are ministries, there's the European Commission, there's the BIU, a lot of ANSPs, airlines, unions who are joining today. So it's really a pleasure to do it. Maybe before I start, we start some aspects which are more technical. First of all, concerning the meeting as such, it will be a 1 hour meeting and 1 hour event, which means that we will have 30 minutes of presentation, and afterwards there will be a Q&A session. Most probably, most of you have seen that there's a chat function for comments and questions, and I would like to encourage you to put in your questions or your comments so that I can address it to the colleagues who are presenting today. This expert talk will be also afterwards available on FABEC.eu and on YouTube. So if you are not able to join until the last minute, or if you would like to share the insights with colleagues, you have a possibility there. Last but not least, we occurred last time that there were some technical issues with the connection, mainly due to the point that some people were connected via VPN and firewalls were too harsh. So there's on the landing page a link to YouTube, but this would have then the negative aspect that you are not seeing the comment function. So I would advise you to stay here online. Having said this, and as you are not so interested in my person, and especially as I'm not an economic expert, I would like to introduce now the colleagues who have prepared and who have spent a lot of effort in this preparation. First, I would like to welcome Vitan Todorov from BULATSA, and I would hand over to him so that he can provide a brief introduction of himself.
Yeah, thank you, Roland. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Vitan Todorov. I'm Director of Finance and Chief Accountant of BULATSA. I have been working for the ANSP for almost 20 years and have been dealing with charges and business planning, also lately with performance planning. And this has been a rather interesting topic, and I think I have some experience in it and will be happy to share it with you. Thank you. Back to you, Roland.
Thank you, Vitan, for this brief introduction. This brings me to my other colleague, which is also a DFS guy like me. So it's Eckhard Drews. Eckhard, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself and then also to go directly to the beef, so to start the presentation. Thanks a lot.
So, thank you very much, and good afternoon from my side. Very warm welcome to the webinar for Economic Surplus. My name is Eckhard Drews, and I work for DFS since approximately 10 years. I'm the Director Controlling of DFS and the Chairman of the FABEC Standing Committee of Finance. As Roland said, the last week, Professor Fricke from the University in Dresden opened the session with the accuracy of forecast. And Vitan and I are very happy to have the opportunity to guide you to the second InterFAB Expert Talk called Economic Surplus. When I was asked to be one of the experts for the topic Economic Surplus, I thought at the beginning that this is not very particularly interesting and exciting. But after I've seen who's participating, Roland told us in his introduction, and the large number of participants, I've changed my mind, and then I noticed that economic surplus is very well an issue, which concerns a lot of stakeholders as states, NSAs, ANSPs, airlines, Commission, and maybe others. So what may you expect in the next approximately 60 minutes? First, Vitan and I will present some slides concerning the topic. For example, the definition of economic surplus. And afterwards, we will hopefully have enough time for an intensive, respectively interesting discussion. And we hope that we at the end may have answered all your questions. So when we look at the agenda, we will see the topics for the approximately half an hour, for the next half an hour. We tried to find a kind of compromise between the participants today who have, on the one side, perhaps only heard about economic surplus, and on the other side, the experts who are much more in the detail and have much more insights. Therefore, we made in the presentation a mix of simple fictive examples explaining the mechanisms, and on the other side with more detailed information. And we hope that we have found a suitable mixture for all of you. And furthermore, we included a mix between real figures of kind of official reports, respectively documents, and simple fictive example for a better understanding. The main point for us will be that we as ANSPs are often confronted with statements by the Commission that ANSPs are generating lots of surplus, and this is often interpreted by the audience as profit. But, and this is something we will see during this presentation, the results differ partially enormous from the annual statutory accounts. And in the last 2 years, we had fruitful and constructive discussion with the PAU, so it was very good. And in this discussion, it became clear that economic surplus and the results of the statutory accounts are not the same. But nevertheless, the Commission is using the term economic surplus when giving statements regarding the profit of ANSPs in publications. This is something we will see in the slide when we go through the presentation. And that is as well one of the reasons why we have included in this presentation the transition between both figures, means economic surplus and the results of the statutory accounts. And furthermore, we included proposals for a better representation of ANSP results. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm looking forward for an open and interesting discussion. And so let's start. And I would like to hand over to Vitan, who has the first part.
Thank you, Eckhard. Yeah, it's really a hot topic these days, the discussion about economic surplus, and it is getting more and more important, especially in these times of crisis. So the economic surplus was introduced by the PRB after the implementation of the determined cost method and the performance scheme. And it was explained in great detail in a very balanced paper, I would say, presented to the Single Sky Committee in the beginning of 2015. So what is actually the economic surplus? It is part of the PRB annual monitoring report. It is something that is analogous to the economic profit rather than accounting profit. As Eckhard mentioned, economic surplus is not identical to what you find in our statutory accounts, prepared broadly under international financial reporting standards and international accounting standards. Further to that, it can be positive or negative, which means that your cost to generate the output could be higher than actually the revenue that you get from the output. Further to that, it is based on the determined cost method and specifics. It can be generated from in a single year, stemming from cost risk sharing. Actually, what are your costs, actual costs versus the determined ones? Then it is impacted also by the traffic risk sharing mechanism. Further to that, it is impacted also by the financial incentives mechanism for capacity, environment, and targets. Also, a very important ingredient to that is the carryover effect. For example, the inflation adjustment, which could be rather big and in amount, and may impact your financial and economic results very significantly. Further to that, the economic gain, the air traffic service provider net gain loss can be impacted also by the uncontrollable costs. What is really, I would say, a little bit, it's a little questionable, is that the PRB estimates that there is an estimated surplus embedded in the cost of capital. But what we would like to point out and take into account when we talk about surpluses is that the way it is being calculated is that it stems from the weighted average cost of capital, which is actually pre-tax. So this is really important to have as understanding that it is pre-tax. So I would be rather happy to discuss in details. Surplus concept is relatively new, and it is expected to gain a similar level of acceptance across the ANSPs. And because it is new and it is really an interesting point, it's worth discussing what actually economic surplus is, how it corresponds to annual accounts, and what purposes these indicators can be used for. So based on the entire charging scheme and performance scheme, and also as recognized by the PRB, the ANSPs are supposed to plan for some economic surplus to exist. And we would argue that cost of equity is not a surplus by default. It is part of the cost base. This is recognized also by ICAO, which is in the fundamental of cost-based establishment, and also really important issue in order to reflect the risk of service provision. Generally, used to be arguments that ANS service provision is something that is really of low, an activity related to low risk, but as we see nowadays, it can be very, very risky business, so to say, and it is not a real business, entirely a business. Also, we think that when we talk about surpluses, attention is to be paid to what is generated above the plan. There is a performance plan which is presented and being prepared to manage a traffic situation in many operational and financial aspects, many for a period of 5 years. And you should plan, the NSP should perform certain activities under this performance plan. So there is some planned revenues, but corresponding to the and return, and but this corresponds to the risk that the NSPs are supposed to manage along these years. And in case we speak about economic surpluses, we should pay more attention what is generated above the plan and not according to the plan. Further to that, I'd like to say that as mentioned in the previous slide, the cost of capital is pre-tax and thus pre-dividend. Therefore, when we speak about economic surpluses, we cannot use this metric to measure the money left for the NSP. This is something that is in the reality, and economic surplus is not equivalent to this notion that it is money left for the NSP. Further to that, also, it is when we're talking about surpluses, they are stemming from the deviation from the assumptions embedded in the plan, which are related to traffic risk, proposed to forecasted traffic, also to how you perform according to your costs, what are the inflations. But it's really tricky to talk about surplus also when you relate it to traffic, to additional revenue generated stemming from traffic serviced above the plan. When I'm talking about this, it is important to get a little bit into the detail, because yes, additional traffic and service units above plan may generate additional revenue above the planned one. However, if you're according to the traffic risk sharing scheme, if you generate service units between 2 to 10% above the plan, actually they're effectively charged at 30%. And if you generate more than 10%, basically these service units are charged at 0%, because all the additional revenue has to be returned to the airspace users in the year N+2. And also, it is important to say that additional traffic might have impact on capacity for performance, and also such source of surplus is out of ANSP control, which means that part of the deviations coming from the planned ones are not, so to say, intended by the ANSP, and but the ANSP have to manage the situation according to the development over the reference period. And here I'd like to pass again the floor to Eckhard to make further presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vitan. And on the following two slides, I have selected two examples in which the PRB is using the economic surplus as a profit in publications. So the first one is of the PRB advice to the Commission in the setting of the union-wide performance targets for RP3, which is dated from September 2018. And here it is said that many ANSPs have accumulated surpluses, which they should be using to improve quality of service. And a little bit later, at the same time, many ANSPs have continued to increase their economic surplus. The second example arises from the PRB monitoring report of 2019 and the RP2 overview, which is dated from October 2020. And there is outlined that some ANSPs accumulated substantial surpluses during the reference period, which they do not have to return to airspace users. In view of COVID-19 crisis, the PRB expect that those accumulated surpluses will use the money to manage the liquidity gap in 2020 and 21 and to reduce their cost during this crisis. So these two examples show that the term surplus is multiple used by the PRB in publications. In the next part, we go more in detail regarding the approaches for a better representation of ANSP results. As I said in the introduction, we would like to make proposals where we, at the end, will have figures which are more nearer to our statutory accounts, and therefore we can see now three statements or three approaches which will be more detailed on the next slide. So the first one is cost may exceed revenues in the ANSP performance plans. The second, the terminology surplus should not be used by PRB presenting ANSP results. And the third one is there should be no mix of actual and planned figures for the calculation of the cost of capital. So now we go through the three approaches, and I would like first represent the first one, that cost may exceed revenues in the ANSP performance plans. So what I tried to do, or what I did, I tried to make a simple example with fictive figures. So you should first have a look at the figures of the performance plans and first at the ANSP figures, On the left side, in this case, the ANSP has cost in their performance plan of 150. But, and this is something which will happen more and more, that the NSA or the state will allow only 100 converted from the charges, but this results in revenues of 100. I think a situation we will see more and more in the future due to the regulation and stronger pressure on the determined unit cost of the ANSPs. So in this case, there is a planned negative result of 50, which have to be financed, for example, by the equity of the ANSP. When we look at the column with the performance plan by the PRB, there will be allowed cost of 100 as the basis for the calculation of the charges, which are as well 100. This means in this calculation, cost and revenues are always the same. And this results in, in the calculation of 0. When we now look at the actual situation and the actual figures, we will see the following situation. Revenues are the same because traffic came, it was planned as in the performance plan, but the ANSP had the ability to reduce their cost by 10. In total, the surplus and actual is the same as in the performance plan. But this is the result. It is notable that the ANSP is making, according to the statutory accounts, is a loss, and we can see here a surplus in the PRB calculation. So this brings me to the resume that the PRB calculation assumes that the financial result for the ANSP in the performance plan is 0, revenues and costs are equal. But for the performance plan, the unit rate might, for example, be reduced by state or NSA, leading to a planned negative result for ANSP. And we will see the consequences as well in the next approach. This approach is the terminology surplus should not be used by PRB presenting ANSP results. So in this case, not fictive numbers, these are actual numbers, real numbers of the DFS of 2017. We can see in the table en route, terminal, and the total terms. The table is outlined in nominal terms. We can see it later when we go to return on equity, the calculation, then we are looking at real terms, but this one is in nominal. In the first line, I outlined the result of the publication of PRB. That was plus 120 million euro. And in the second line, the result of the statutory accounts are represented. And there we have minus 20 million euro. So there's a huge gap of 140 million euros between economic surplus and the statutory accounts. So on the next slide, we see again an attempt to simplify the mechanism with a simple example with fictive numbers. In this example, we can see the huge difference between economic surplus and the statutory accounts. Example says minus 30 million euros for the statutory accounts and plus 31 million for economic surplus. And we will see on the next slide the transition and hopefully the answer how this is possible. And I would like to show you the transition between both figures on this side. At first, again, the sample of the previous slide and the look on the profit and loss situation of the annual statutory account. So we can see we have revenues of 70. In this case, the ANSP had costs of 100, separated by staff cost, operational cost, depreciation, and the financial result. Afterwards, there will be the transition to the economic surplus, and I would focus at the first on the last line, and there you can see the plus 31.6 million euros. And for the reason of simplification, I focused the transition only on 3 positions. In this example, the major deviation results from the position we have seen in the first approach, the deviation of the revenue reduction of 50. The other 2 positions in this transition have been presented by Vitan on, I think, slide 3, when he introduced in the economic surplus. And here only the 2 position, uncontrollable cost and bonus malus. The next position in the transition is that economic surplus is calculated in real terms compared to statutory accounts, which are outlined in nominal terms. And at the end, there is a huge difference of more than 60 million euros, with minus 30 million euros in the statutory account and plus 31.6 million euros in the economic surplus. And as we have seen in slide before, which may lead to huge misinterpretations. Last but not least, we will have a look at the third approach, no mix of actual and planned figures for the calculation of cost of capital. The figures in this table show again real figures of DFS from 2017, and as I said, in real terms in this case. In the columns, performance plan, actual and economic surplus, and in the lines, the asset base, the return on equity, and at the end, the result. And you can see that in the performance plan, the planned asset base of DFS is multiplied by the return on equity, means 460 million euros multiplied by 7.45%. And this results in 32 million euros. Only planned figures are considered. And considering the actual situation, DFS had a result of approximately 36 million euros and an actual asset base of 683 million euros. And this results in return on equity of 5.23%. In this case, only actual figures are considered. And when you remember, as I showed you the slides for the results of the statutory accounts of DFS, you could see there were for en route approximately 40 million euros. And the number for this in real terms are the 36 million euros. So this is corresponding to the slide we have seen before. PRB is mixing the plan and actual figures, calculating the results. So the actual asset base multiplied by planned return on equity. And this results in 51 million euros. And this differs enormously from the real situation, which we have seen some slides before, and as well here when you can see 35 or 36 million euros versus 51 million euros. So the calculation of PRB shows a totally different return on equity compared to the real accounts. And this, I call it virtual return on equity, shown in the official monitoring reporting, as you can see in the table, might lead to a misunderstanding and wrong conclusions for the one who's reading and try to interpret it out of this. So this is something, there should be another approach than it's at the moment. That brings us to the last slide, the conclusion of the economic surplus method. The first one, that the economic surplus method is very technical and I think only at expert level fully comprehensible. We tried to make it today in the webinar a little bit more transparent. But at the end, I know it's not an easy issue. It's partially complex. Still a misunderstood concept, which differs strongly from the legal books. We have seen the gap of 140 million euros for DFS, and possibly the situation is perhaps not so big, but other ANSPs are in the same situation, that there is a big difference between both figures. And the third one, that economic surplus is transferred in publications. We have seen that on the 2 slides, into better known term profit, thus indicating that ANSPs have had an enormous surplus, which might maybe not be the case if we have verified in the presentation. So for the next, I would like to hand over to Vitan.
Yeah. Thank you, Eckhard. This issue is really technical, and I hope that we didn't confuse very much our audience. When we're talking about economic surplus, financial profit according to the legal books, and it's really, it's not an easy subject, but it's an important one, and maybe that people should discuss it and use it with greater care. So we think that also that the economic surplus should be indicative to show what was generated in excess of the performance plan, and ensure some consistency with the annual reports. Because a performance plan is a plan which, no matter that it's first aimed at serving properly the operations and maintain and mitigating co-risks and controlling co-risks and managing co-risks actually during an RP reference period, the performance plans contain kind of a risk-reward in itself. So when we talk about surpluses, it should be what was generated in excess to the performance plan. Yeah, it's really good that the PRB has taken initiative to invent this indicator, economic surplus, but it would be good to discuss it in a greater detail and what actually it shows and what purposes actually it can be used for. Further to that, I think that last but not least, it's really important to improve the message to the targeted audience so that we avoid confusion how this economic surplus is being perceived, how it's being interpreted, and this creates some difficulties to financial experts to translate and interpret data to decision makers. So I'd like to, as mentioned in the previous slide, we think that it cannot be used as a proxy or another similar indicator to show that economic surplus is kind of equivalent to money left within the ANSP. And having said that, I'd like to pass the floor to Roland and see if our audience has questions in this topic, related to this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Vitan. Thank you, Eckhard, for this comprehensive presentation. To be quite honest, I'm not an economic guy. I'm just a civil journalist. And when I started this the work on this webinar, I engaged as usual in Wikipedia to start with the first question. When I looked it up in Wikipedia, there was something on price policy. There was nothing regarding accounting. Is there any relation with this? Is it so brand new? What is the background, Eckhard, if I may ask you?
Good question. I have to admit, I Googled the term economic surplus as well, and only found the same definition as you. That said that economic surplus refers to two related quantities, the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. And I have to say, I don't know where in the ATM world economic surplus is used. In the annual accounts or profit or loss accounts, there you will find key performance indicators like EBT, earning before taxes, or the EBIT, earning before interest and taxes, or return on sales as a relative ratio are used. So in this case, every reader might know and interpretate the figures, and that is one of the advantage of an established KPI when it's comparable and not only within a branch like the ATM industry. In my mind, a KPI for monitoring or comparing profits, losses, or statutory accounts, and when you want surplus, are useful, but this KPI should be nearby the statutory accounts, respectively official data of ANSPs, which are at the best certificated by an external auditor. So it's a good way, but it should be the right KPI, which should be used for all ANSPs.
Vitan, if I may address you with a second question. Do you know other branches where the key performance indicator economic surplus is used?
Yeah, I also tried to Google this indicator, and I haven't found a very wide use of it. So it's a bit abstract, and when we are talking about surpluses, it's maybe better to use the annual accounts and to use well-established indicators for analysis of ANSPs or any other business. Thank you.
Thank you, Vitan. These two questions were also a little bit to help the audience to insert the questions, because I think it's really an abstract story, but as you can see, also for the expert, it was somehow new and somehow surprising, and they have to understand it in detail. Therefore, I would like to ask you also to come now with your questions. There are already two questions in the chat. Maybe first of all, first one to Eckhard from Anonymous. I don't know who it is. Going one step back, I always understood that the regulator needs to control cost. Why does a regulator need to control surplus or profit?
It's a good question. In my opinion, the regulator has to look at the cost and as well on the financial situation of an ANSP, and therefore we have our annual reports certificated by an external auditor. And I think this is the main information where everything is included, should be nearby IFRS. And so therefore, from my perspective, it's enough to have this control instrument. As I said, when you want to have an additional KPI like surplus, then it should be nearby the official data as annual accounts, and nothing which is an own definition and which is very difficult to understand.
Maybe an additional question to Eckhard. Taking the European approach, does this reporting affect only BULATSA and DFS, or are there other ANSPs involved?
In my point of view, the reporting respective to many other ANSPs have the same, well, I will not say problem, but the same views on that. I know that this is the case at the FABIC ANSPs. I know it's for DanubeFAB. That's why Vitan and I are here for discussing this. And as I know, FAB CE, the FAB Central Europe, as well. Perhaps not all NSPs have such a big difference between both figures, like the DFS with the 140 million euros in 2017. But when talking about a surplus, each, or I think most of the ANSP will detect some kind of difference. And then for me, it's a question of the magnitude of the difference and if the corresponding ANSP is confronted with the figures in the public. Perhaps the discussion of today, and that's a little bit my wish, leads to some kind of thought-provoking in some ANSPs, which are perhaps not yet so concerned with the figures of economic surplus. But when the ANSP will check their data and the impacts, respectively the consequences of the difference, they might see that they have as well a difference, and it's good to look a little bit deeper in the details and to know where the difference comes from.
I noted here feedback from PIU. Sebastian Porte wrote, "Good afternoon. Would all European ANSP be in a position to publish detailed, independent, audited financial statements for en route and terminal ANS? I understood that not all ANSP publish annual reports with financial statements." Do you have a view on this, Vitan?
Yeah, according to the regulation, every ANSP, every European Union ANSP has to publish their annual accounts according to IFRS, and this has to be public. Ours are on our website, so they are prepared according to the international financial reporting standards and international accounting standards. So, there is a very close link between the annual financial accounts and what's put in the reporting tables for separation of the accounts, the costs between en route and terminal. And also we submit every year a specification for information disclosure where everything is separated between en route and terminal costs, revenues, etc. So yeah, I think this responds to the question.
Thank you, Vitan. Maybe an additional one just to confirm the point. There's an additional question from Sebastian. In my question, it's important to read audited financial statements for en route and terminal separately. As far as I understood your answer, this is already the case that you report both.
Yeah, we prepare the financial statements according to IFRS, so it's about total cost and the allocation between en route and terminal. And I think, as it is the case for everyone, is monitored also by NSAs. So I don't see any issue with that. Thank you.
There's a question, Eckhard, from Wilma. He asked, what recommendation could you provide in order to avoid misinterpretations related to the term economic plus or other economic terms related to ANS ATM industry?
First, I would say two possibilities. The one possibility is no longer to use economic surplus or to use it and not to for publications. And the second one was, I said before, to find a better KPI that is nearer by the annual accounts. And three approaches I've made, I think, when they're recognized, and then we are nearer to something where we can see the real results of the ANSPs. So implementing the three approaches, then look further. So we try to make it as a proposal from our ANSPs to implement or to update a model, and that maybe can be used at the end for surpluses which are nearby the annual accounts.
Another question by Jenny from UK. She asked, ANSPs operate in a monopoly business subject to regulation. Do terms like EBIT or EBT provide a sufficient measurement criteria in a monopoly context? Are there other monopoly provider industries that present alternatives?
I think other monopolists like communications in Germany have as well, I think, annual accounts. And in the annual accounts, there are KPIs like, as I said, earning before taxes. And therefore, for me, it's useful to implement these figures as well. I know that the ANSPs don't have a chance to influence the traffic, and therefore our charges. It's different to the markets where I can have marketing activities and then increase my revenues. This is not possible. So in this case, it's, I think, okay to look first on the cost side, but the mechanism behind, especially when calculating surplus, should be changed.
Vitan, one question to you. In the calculation, I saw that there were also negative figures, meaning a sur minus, if I may say so. My question would be, what is the consequence of a sur minus? I understood the surplus means somehow that ANSPs have a lot of money and they can reduce charges. But what happens if there's a sur minus in the PRB reporting?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And as indicated by the PRB, the surplus can be either positive or negative. You can end up in a negative economic surplus. And this could be driven by a lot of factors which are not controllable by the ANSP. For example, you can end up in a negative surplus or sur minus, as you say, if we may use this term, when your actual costs exceed your determined cost. Also, you may end up in a sur minus when you have impact from the inflation adjustment, which can be sometimes very substantial, and depending on the additional traffic that you may gain, you may serve through your airspace versus the planned one. Because of the traffic risk sharing, you may retain only a small additional part of the revenue, and the rest is put in your records as an obligation to the airspace users. And this may not be sufficient. This additional revenue may not be sufficient for an ANSP to fund additional costs in order to provide safe and high and quality service to traffic. So in such cases, if this happens, and it might be, if I use such a term, perfect storm, if you end up in such combination, you burn money in order to more than you're allowed to spend in order to provide high quality, safe and high quality services. So this is not a situation which an ANSP can endure for a long time. So yeah, this is actually an outcome from a sur minus.
Interesting to hear. There's another question which might be a little bit related, because I don't know if it's the purpose of this webinar to get confused, but there's a question from Anonymous. Again, I still struggle to understand the added value of the indicator. Eckhard, to what extent does it improve regulation?
The economic surplus?
Yeah.
It's not a figure which comes from us, so I think I'm not the right one to answer the question. As I said before, I would not use this indicator. For me, it has not so much advantages, and therefore I can't say this figure brings for me not much advantages, and I can only say we saw the gap for DFS, and I know that other ANSPs have perhaps not such a big gap, but they have gaps as well, and therefore it's, from my perspective, not useful to use this figure.
Oh, thank you, Eckhard, for this open answer. Maybe to come to one point of the conclusions from Vitan. Vitan, if I look, there's one point is to look on what is the purpose for an expert. The other point is to look on the side, what does it mean for political decision makers? Do you see there an issue concerning that the people understand it correct, or that decision makers can make policies out of it, or that other stakeholders are getting more and more confused? What's your view on this?
I think that when talking about surpluses, and this is also relevant to any other metrics and indicators that are being introduced and calculated, there needs to be a clear message. What is their meaning? What is their content? What is they can be used for, and what they should not be used for. And in speaking currently about the present situation, I would say that the way I see the economic surplus is being interpreted is that this is kind of a proxy, as I said, for money left within the ANSP. And this is really a dangerous interpretation, as it can influence the decisions that are taken by decision makers. So yeah, this is one of the things that needs to be improved in order to provide the correct communication to the entire audience, because it's when you're talking, the information about surpluses is being created by regulators, by airlines, by states and commission. So based on that, they might take decisions. And this is important to know what is really the background and the mechanics behind such surpluses. And as I started with the PRB paper initially, economic surplus might not be something that is so negative to have it. It could be useful, and it's an indicator that can show you if a business or service provision, sorry, business is not the correct word, the service provision is being managed, and the risks during a reference period have been calculated correctly, and if they're being managed correctly, which is important as for the safety and the high quality of services. So it can be used as a proactive indicator, but to a certain extent. Thank you.
Thank you, Vitan, for the feedback. Maybe Eckhard, one point, and I would like to ask also Sebastian from the PIU, if he may like, to write a little comment on this. The question is, there was a task force established on InterFAB level together with the PRB on the subject. So what I understood is that there is now a very much better understanding. However, there are still differences and different needs. What is your view? How can we proceed? What are the results, and how do you see the way forward?
Yeah, you're right. There was a joint task force, Eurocontrol, FABEC, InterFAB task force for economic surplus. It was established in, I think, September 2020, so in the last year. There was a meeting, and the task force consists of Eurocontrol, some FABs were participating in InterFAB. And discussion was, as I said in my introduction, was very open and very constructive. We discussed about a lot of things, like we did today. So we agreed to some action items that, when I remember right, that should explanation added in the monitoring report. And that economic surplus does not reflect the figures of the legal books. So this is, from my point of view, it's okay. I think there's an asterisk or some kind of comment. But at the end, when the data is used and economic surplus is further used from the Commission in the same context, then it's a little bit difficult to find a good way. I think we on the data views who had the conversation and the discussion, we were not so far away by each other. So it's at the end kind of interpretation for myself how to use these figures. So from my perspective, very good task force. Some minor action items are open, or some action items are open, and the economic surplus discussion is still going on. That's my feedback from the part of the task force.
Okay, thank you, Eckhard. There's a feedback from Sebastian, who said, at all, there's a reader's guide in the PRB monitoring report, Annex 2, which provides information on how the economic surplus is computed. Might be useful to better understand this concept. I think that's something which might be interesting for those who would like to get more deeper insight. If I may add one point from my perspective at the end, having heard all the discussions up to now, maybe it's somehow also an issue with the wording that it should not be called economic surplus, because a surplus is for many people, especially those who are not native speaker, immediately profit, and I understood that this is not the case. I understood also from the discussions and the presentation that there are proposals how to improve it by the InterFAB colleagues and how to go forward. Hence, I would suggest that at least the group of PRU and InterFAB colleagues would continue to work on it and maybe to improve that further. If there are no additional questions, there's one hint again to the definition. I would suggest that we finalize here 2 minutes too early the session. I would like to thank Vitan. I would like to thank Eckhard for this contribution and the work they have done. To be honest, it was a hell of work, but I saw to make it understandable not only for accountants or directors of finance, and I think they made a very good work. For all those who would like to read the slides afterwards and would like to see it again, it will be published on FABIC.eu, so you will get there the information you need, and I think it's worthwhile to do because it's not so easy to understand. Thanks a lot to everybody for joining this webinar. Thank you to Vitan and Eckhard, and enjoy the day. Bye.